With that, let's get started. So first off, we are back to a 7-hour time difference between here and North America. So welcome back, everyone. We're at a regular difference in time, as it were, getting into winter. And as I said last week, we are spending the next several weeks in finding your voice. Last week, we talked about words that come from non-Hebrew origins that are integral to modern Hebrew, and frankly, also ancient Hebrew for some of them. And this week, we're going to do a topic that we've done in the past, but I've arranged it slightly differently. And we haven't done it quite the same way with a title as direct as this. The title of today's class is Don't Say That, Say This Instead. And this is a collection of previous words that we've gone over in the past, words that have been submitted by you, some even as recent as last week's classes. And in general, an understanding that not only does language evolve, all languages evolve, they change, words fall out of use and out of style, other ones take their place, but also how we learn languages, especially in the days nowadays of online free translators that depend on user experience to perfect them. We see a lot of things happening that we have to correct ourselves, or we have to unlearn things, or we have to relearn things. And so you're going to see in today's topic, and don't worry, there are jokes in there. There are even some off-color jokes, perhaps. But we are going to split it into 4 different sections, all under the um, rubric of don't say that, say this instead. Some of these, again, are words that are out of date, or simply you just won't hear them in everyday modern Hebrew. And remember, we focus on mainstream everyday modern Hebrew. This is not a place to flex liturgical Hebrew or biblical Hebrew or how esoteric of a word, even that I may love, versus how you're going to be understood on street or in everyday situations here in Israel. Number one. And number two, we're going to look at first off that, we're going to look at um, again, words and phrases that have fallen out of use and what their contemporary version are. Common mistakes, especially if you're using a certain online translator or other ones that aren't properly translated. And so thinking a direct translation from English might work when in fact it doesn't. Common mispronunciations. There's a lot of sounds in Hebrew that we don't necessarily have in American English or in other languages that many of you speak here in class. Currently at 281 participants, so there's a lot of different languages being spoken here, but there are sounds in Hebrew that are regularly used we don't normally find. So those also lead to misunderstandings. And often, and another category you're going to see is common misspellings. We've talked about this a lot. We'll continue to talk about it, especially in upcoming classes. In Hebrew, spelling is destiny. You cannot switch and swap one letter for another just because in modern Hebrew they have the same pronunciation. You're going to see that very bluntly in the course of today. You cannot swap, for example, an aleph with an ayin, or a chet with a chaf, or a kaf with a kuf. You just can't do that. Every word is comprised of a root and a form, and that root, called a shoresh, has at least 50% of a word's meaning. So that specific combination of 3 letters, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, will dictate every formulation of that root in various forms, which means you can't swap out letters. You have to spell precisely. And this is especially a challenge for children of Israeli expats or people in general who grew up speaking Hebrew and maybe spoke fluently and continue to speak fluently, but never actually learned how to spell, much less write and spell out Hebrew in text or in writing. And this is what we're going to look at a little bit as well in today's class. So a lot of different topics to cover in the larger guise of don't say that, say this instead. If you have ones that are your favorite, either your mispronunciations or yours, don't say that, say this instead, please write them in the chat. I'll be happy to share them at the top of the hour, along with going over questions in the Q&A, and I'll talk about Wednesday's class, Cafe Oleh Conversations, as well as next week's class. But let's get started with the time that we have. So with that, just pull this up. So as always, we're going to work off our spreadsheet for today. You will get a copy of this spreadsheet along with the recording up on YouTube in the next day or so. And as you see, we did it a little differently today as opposed to weeks past, where in addition to the English on the left and the transliteration on the right, you're going to see in the middle for most of our categories, it's going to say, instead of saying this, say this. Okay, so always guide yourself as to where we are with that. So let's start with some question words, because this is a big one. And I hear this one quite a lot, in fact. Let me just do that here. Oh, sorry. That'll help me. Perfect. Ha'im. Ha'im is a word that many of us have learned that is, as I wrote here, a question. We use this at the beginning of a question when the question itself does not contain who, what, when, where, why, or how, right? All of those words have a Hebrew equivalent. Mi, ma, matai, efo, lama, ech. Okay. We're taught, many of us, again, this is blanket statements. Some of you may have not learned this word, and that's great. But having listened to many of you and having worked with a lot of Olim over all these years, I know for a fact many of you know this word Ha'im. And you're taught it's the question word. Can I, do I, may I, all those things. Guess what? Drop this word out of your vocabulary immediately. Immediately. I remember I recently was asked to speak at my high school alma mater, a Jewish day school, and they asked me, the students asked me, this was a conversation in fluent Hebrew, which was absolutely amazing. 20 plus years later to see how well evolved their Hebrew program was. And someone asked me something that I would have liked to have known then, or that I teach Olim now. And this was my number one word. Do not use the word ha'im. You will hear this word in formal Hebrew, like on TV, on news. You may even read it in the news, but we do not use this word in everyday conversation. Very formal Hebrew, you'll hear this, yes, but in everyday conversation, as it says here, instead of saying this, say this. Simply use the same inflection as in English when asking a question. For example, um, if you want to say, do you want me to call you? Okay. In Hebrew, you would say, אתה רוצה שאני אתקשר אליך? Listen to how I said it, right? Just like I would I asked the question in English, do you want me to call you? Do you want me to call you? אתה רוצה שאני אתקשר אליך? The same going up at the end, right? We call that in, you'll hear that often referred to as uptalk, where everything sounds like a question because you go up at the end, because that's how we're taught to ask questions, right? Even if a question begins with a question word, we always go up at the end. All you have to do is remove that word at the beginning, ha'im, and you're saying the exact same thing. And not only are you saying the exact same thing, but remember one of the cardinal rules of modern Hebrew and Hebrew in general. If you can say the same thing with fewer words, fewer letters, fewer syllables, the better. So if I am understood as asking a question and I can drop out a word ha'im, one word with two syllables, all the better. And I'm totally understood. So this is a word I remember learning in Hebrew school and then in Jewish day school. Drop out of your vocabulary altogether unless you're in very formal situations. And most of us are not in that situation, myself included. Another one, me'ayin. Me'ayin is a word we find in the Bible. I also learned this word to the extent I had a job shortly after high school and going into college, and it was after a long time in Israel. And I saw there was an Israeli couple having, browsing the store I worked in. And I walked right up to them feeling confident as anything. And what did I say to them? What did I ask them? Me'ayin atem. And they looked at me and they burst out in laughter and walked away. Not because they were, oh my God, there's people speaking Hebrew. It's like, what dimension does this guy think he's in that we use this? This would be like, wherefore art thou? We do not use this word whatsoever. The modern Hebrew word is me'efo. Me is the prefix for from, and efo is the question word where. So from where? You can literally translate, or where are you from, as we would normally say. Me'efo ata, speaking single male. Me'efo ata, where are you from? Me'efo at, me'efo atem, and so forth. Okay? Me'efo. Do not use this word. Instead of saying this, say this. This one isn't so much taught as people just assume that that's what you say. If efo is where and me'efo is from where, then to where or where to must be le'efo. There is no such word in Hebrew, le'efo. The word is le'an. Le'an means where to. Le'an ata olech, where are you going? To where are you going, literally, but it means where are you going? Okay. In which direction are you going? To where are you going? Okay. Instead of saying all these words, say this. Let's move on to some others. This one. I hear this one among, I love Olim. I work with Olim. I want Olim to be the heads of this country, but this one needs to change sooner than later. And I think this is a generational thing as much as when is our contact with Israeli culture. If you hear someone say shalom, flat, like I just did, shalom, or shalom aleichem, stop. First off, we do not say shalom blank flat like that. And I hear a lot of people trying to start a conversation and kol hakavod, as we say, props for starting a conversation, but that's not how we speak. And you can hear that by any time you answer the phone to a telemarketer, or any time you watch the news, or anytime you hear anyone conversation, they will say shalom in a sing-song. Shalom, shalom, right? Shalom. That's how we say shalom if you want to start a conversation. As for shalom aleichem, I understand it has religious undertones, and usually that's the context in which someone is using it. They're religiously observant. That's what they grew up saying. If that's who you are, own it. If that is not who you are, for example, hear and say this, you can say shalom rav. Why? Because shalom aleichem, alechem is the plural second person. Shalom to all of you, or shalom upon all of you is how it would normally be translated. Shalom rav is the exact same thing. If you watch TV, for example, when the newscasters sign on during the daily news bulletin that they're doing, whenever hour it may be, they'll often say Shalom Rav, or they'll even say Shalom Rav Lachem. Right? Shalom Rav is to a group of people, just like Shalom Aleichem. It's just more inviting. It is more, for lack of a better term, ecumenical. Shalom Aleichem is very stodgy. It's very religious. It's very old. That's who you are, own it. If it's not who you are and you want to sound a little bit more local, Shalom Rav is very polite and is very inclusive. If none of those are who you are, guess what? You can also say hi. Hi. Hi, or even hey, but hi is perfectly all right. And if you really want to be local, you can say Ahlan. Ahlan comes from Arabic, just like a lot of our informal and slang words. Ahlan or ahlan simply means welcome. It's part of the expression ahlan bik or ahlan bikum, welcome unto you. There's no religious undertone in it whatsoever. You can say this to Jews, you can say this to Arabs. It's totally understood and being okay. Okay. If you want to be a little bit more formal, instead of shalom rav, you can also give a greeting to someone based on the time of day. Boker tov, if it's in the morning. Tzolaim tovim, good afternoon. It's very stodgy, just like it is in English, by the way, to say good afternoon. And erev tov, good evening. Okay. All of those are great ways instead of saying shalom or shalom aleichem. Okay. Okay. This one we've covered before. A lot of these we've covered before, but it's always worth repeating. If you have in your vocabulary ha'im ani yachol or ha'im ani yachola, throw it out now, because I know you're translating directly from English, and I know you're trying to be polite, which I love. There's two problems with this sentence. One is ha'im, which we've already covered, and the second, sorry, just 1 second. The second is ani yachol or ani yachola, depending on gender. Yachol, male, yachola, female. Yachol, first off, in Hebrew, we don't have the can versus may debate, right? We all either have or are that annoying relative who says, I don't know if you can, asking someone to instead say may without actually correcting them. You're passive aggressively asking them to say may I instead of correcting them. In Hebrew, we don't have that debate. Okay. Everything is the can or may doesn't matter. But yachol, and you're going to see this again in the next one we do, is a very theoretical verb. We don't use it nearly as much in Hebrew as we do can and able in English. Can and able is as much theoretical as it can also be practical in English. In Hebrew, it's almost always theoretical. So if you say ha'im ani yachol, and then fill in the question, fill in the rest of it as you would in English. Can I do something or may I do something? And you translate it the same way as this. It sounds like a theoretical question or a rhetorical question, whichever one you want to understand, meaning you're not actually asking someone this question, you're asking yourself it, which is not conversation, perhaps for yourself, but there's multiple things wrong with this question. All you have to do to be polite, folks, is say efshal. Efshal is one of the magical words of Hebrew because oftentimes after efshal, you don't have to conjugate the verb. You can use the infinitive. Efshal in and of itself is a very polite word, and it means many, many things at once. It means, is it possible? May I? Can I? Could I? Would I? Should I? All of those words, efshal, one word. Hebrew is super efficient like that. Okay. Ha'im ani yochol, throw it out. I know people who are fluent in Hebrew and they still use this expression, throw it out now. Just like asking someone, can you or would you? The same thing, just changing ani, I for ata, throw it out. Ha'im ata yochol, throw it out. It sounds like you're having an existential conversation with someone. Would it be possible for you to blah, blah, blah? No, just ask them to do it. Could they, would they, efshal? Okay, efshal. If you still want to use that verb yachol, here's how you're going to say it. And this may be a little I don't want this to sound ageist. We're going to have some ageist comments in a little bit. But this is also about how Hebrew is spoken. And just like in English, how we have contractions and words that elide into themselves, meaning that they sort of mush together. Same thing with Hebrew. Listen to how I say atayachol. Tayachol, tayachol, right? I drop the a at the beginning, and tayachol, atayachol becomes one word. Tayachol, right? It's even transliterated like that. And if you were asking this to a female, it's a little bit hard to say for a native English speaker, but it would sound like tichola, tichola, right? Either of those are okay if you still want to hold on to that verb yachol. If you don't, all you have to do is ask if shall. Okay? And especially, again, if shall is as much, it changes based on not just what comes after it, but more importantly, who you're looking at and speaking to. Remember, you're not speaking to a wall when you're using these terms. You can practice looking at a wall, but you're not speaking to a wall. So if I say to someone, אפשר לשטוף את הכלים, right? The context in speaking to two people will make it clear, am I talking about, can I wash the dishes or could you wash the dishes, right? There's other parts of communication, folks, that's beyond words. It's who's where. It's what actions am I doing leading up to it. Maybe I'm grabbing some plates and getting to the sink. Maybe I'm giving dishes to someone else, or I'm looking at them at the dish. There's all sorts of other nonverbal context going into the conversation. If shall is a magic word that applies to it all. Ani lo yodea or ani lo yodat, depending on gender, is our next one. Yes, you can say ani lo yodea, ani lo yodat, but the more common thing you're going to hear is ein li musag. Ein li musag means I have no idea. It's a non-literal translation, but you're going to hear ein li musag much more often. Why? Well, first off, you don't have to conjugate any verb, as opposed to yodea or yodat. And it more means I have no idea. You can really lean into it. Ein li musag. Or you can say, sorry, אין לי מושג. You can still use אין לי, אני לא יודע. But I'm telling you also, אין לי מושג is much more heard and much more used in everyday Hebrew. I told you if shal is a magic word and it's a polite word, this is its friend, slicha. Slicha is a super polite word in Hebrew. It does literally mean forgiveness, but it also means excuse me, excuse, pardon, all those words at once. Slicha is a very polite word, folks. You don't ever need to say slicha bevakasha. Again, this is a cultural thing as much as it's a translation thing. I know in many of our native countries, we're taught to say please after everything. Excuse me, please. Sorry, please. Or sorry after everything, right? Slicha covers all of that at once. It's not that we're not polite in Israel. It's that slicha covers it all. Okay? So you don't have to say slicha bevakasha. That sounds to a native Israeli, that sounds like number one, you're translating from another language, but it sounds fake. It sounds like you're being overly ingratiatingly polite, which means that you're being total fake. Israelis can sniff out people being fake pretty fast. Slicha is fine. And depending on how you say slicha, by the way, it shows your tone and what you're looking for. Slicha, nice way. Slicha, a little bit more direct. You need someone's attention. Versus slicha, when they're available, please come over here. Versus slicha could mean Jay is walking behind you on the sidewalk and you were walking way too slow. Get out of my way. Okay? Slicha is a catch-all word. Just like efshar bevakasha. Now you can say efshar bevakasha. For example, efshar od mayim bevakasha. If you're at a restaurant and you ask the waiter or waitress, could I have some more water, please? Efshar od mayim bevakasha. That's perfectly all right. You can also just say efshar od mayim, perfectly polite. You're not being rude because you didn't say the word please. Keep that understanding of the word please after everything as a non-Israeli thing. Again, not that Israelis are impolite as a whole culture, but we don't overuse the word please like certain other cultures do. If you want to say please, look at how you can say it here. Again, contracting and eliding words. Efshar, and then instead of saying bevakasha, take out one of those, specifically the bet at the beginning, and say vaksha. Okay? Efshar od mayim vaksha. You'll hear people say this all the time. Instead of saying efshar od mayim vaksha, bevakasha, excuse me, they'll say efshar od mayim vaksha, vaksha efshar od mayim, right? That's how you're going to use this word. Truncate it. Think of it as you're on the go. Not everyone is going to have the time for all those words, even that one extra syllable. Okay. This gets again into our theoretical, abstract, rhetorical, existential English versus practical Hebrew. Haiti rotze. Now, it's true that in Hebrew, if you want to do the conditional tense, I would do something, to would do something, right? You use the past tense of the verb lihiot, to be, plus the present tense. So, haiti holech, I would go. Haiti rotze, I would like. Haiti ma'adif, I would prefer. But if you're ordering something or you're asking for something, don't say this. First off, hayiti rotze is 5 syllables. I'm going to tell you in 2 syllables and one word how to say the exact same thing, and you will sound so much more local and so much more accurate with your Hebrew. The word is esmach. We've talked about this word esmach. This is another magical word. Esmach will take the place of I would like. It also takes the place of replying in the affirmative. Instead of saying yes, ken, you can also say esmach. Esmach is the future tense of the verb lismoach. You know the word sameach, happy. Lismoach means to become happy. Esmach, I will be happy. Okay, so instead of saying haiti rotze, like you would in English, I would like something. Esmach le, I would be happy for something. Okay, it sounds better. It sounds more local. It sounds more authentic. And again, it holds on to our cardinal rule of fewer words, fewer letters, fewer syllables, always better when trying to express the same thing. Many of us, myself included, learned that be'emet means seriously. you just don't hear it nearly as much as you will hear Birtzinut. Because emet means truth. So be'emet means more like truthfully or truly, versus if you're trying to say seriously, the word serious in Hebrew is retzini, and seriousness is retzinut. So if you ask or reply to someone birtzinut means seriously, that's normally what you're trying to say. Or instead of saying be'emet, put a little bit more oomph behind it and say nu be'emet, right? Sound a little bit more, again, that word local. Nu is a great verbal, nonverbal word. It doesn't mean anything. It just adds a little bit of oomph to something. Nu bemet, if I want to ask a question. If I was incredulous about someone, I could say the exact same thing with a different tone. Nu bemet. Nu bemet, seriously, or nu bemet, come on, right? You're joking. Versus birtzinut, seriously, great words. Okay. Bemet, just be careful of it. I think people lean on this word a little too much. We don't hear it and we don't use it nearly as much as these other two options. This one came up in a private lesson I was giving last week to someone in the States, and they started replying to me. They have great Hebrew, still need a lot of practice, and they use this expression afal pisha. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. And I stopped him in the middle because normally I let him just keep talking. And this one I said, nope, I got to stop you right there. We don't say afal pisha. Afal pisha is like ha'im. Let newscasters use it and read it in a newspaper. Don't use it yourself. First off, how many words do we have here? 3 words, 6 letters altogether. Af al pi, and then we include the article she. Guess what? You can say all of that in one word, lamrot. Lamrot she, despite or although. Okay. If you want to have other expressions to say it and sound even more um, sophisticated because you learned afal pisha and you think that's a very sophisticated word, and it is. It's also very outdated and it's very formal. Use the expression imki or umnam. All 3 of these mean although. Afal pisha, it's just not used in everyday conversation. Lamrot she, imki, umnam. Listen to all those words, by the way. They all have 2 syllables apiece, as opposed to afal pisha, which is twice the amount of syllables. Lamrot she, imki, umnam. You will sound instantly, even if the rest of your vocabulary is not that advanced, you will sound so much better and so much more, again, local. Apropos nonverbal communication, we had this because that came up with the word nu, is what do we do when we're looking for a word? And we've talked about nonverbal communication cues in the past. A great segue again to check out our YouTube playlist with all of our previous lessons and type in nonverbal communication, Cafe Oleh. You'll see this class. I want you to sound like a local. If you don't like the sound that's fine. You can say also fine. Just try not to say In Hebrew, we don't really have the sound uh. We do every once in a while, but not as a standardized sound. And you will definitely, it's not that I'm telling you to lose your accent or lose where you're from, but we have other great filler words if you're looking for the word. Again, I would love to get you off of and get you onto m, but if that doesn't work for you, here are some others. The classic ki'ilu. Ki'ilu is the equivalent in Hebrew as like is to American English. I only tell people who are young and young at heart to use ki'ilu. It's slowly getting outdated, and it dates you as well. Young and young at heart. Maybe ageist to say that, but it's absolutely true. People over a certain age will not be heard saying ki'ilu in a rapid fire conversation unless they're using the literal meaning of the word ki'ilu, which is as if. Ki'ilu in a space filler, which is a normal means of communication when we pause to find the right word or right thing we're trying to say, means like in this context. If you don't like and you don't like ki'ilu because for all the reasons I said, Your best bet is the phrase zot omeret. That is to say. This is the equivalent in Hebrew of the English that is to say. Right? You've probably heard the expression ma zot omeret. What does this mean? It literally translates as what does this say? Just as zot omeret, this is to say, is a great word to use. Okay, zot omeret, right? You can stretch it out as much as you want while you're trying to formulate your thought. Okay. I've talked about being local. Now, if you want to be hyper local, right, you're going to use, just like we talked about Alan a little bit ago, you're going to use the word yani. Yani comes from Arabic, yani, which means. It literally means, means, right? To mean something. And you will hear people use this, Arabs and Jews alike, because it is that filler, right? They're talking, they say, blah, 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 yani, and they keep going, right? Say that is to say, or meaning, blah, 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 right? It's a filler as much as it has its own meaning. And if you are extra fancy or you fancy yourself to be extra fancy, you can use the word dehainu. Dehainu comes from Aramaic. It is the same meaning as all the things we hear in this group. It is very highfalutin Hebrew. As I wrote here, dehainu requires a monocle. You need to be a little full of yourself and what you're saying to use the word dehainu, meaning that is to say, or the filler. Okay. M, E, Zotomeret are your best bets. Try to drop and all the other ones take the cultural tag that I wrote with it. This one was requested by someone in our conversation group last Wednesday. I had never heard of this one. I had to look this one up. Bein choveko or bein kovecho. I had to look this up because we don't use this anymore. A great example of what we don't use anymore. Okay. We say bechol ofen, bechol mikre, or bekitzur to mean anyways. Okay. If you know this one, drop it out because again, never heard it. Don't use this. And finally, this one you definitely have to unlearn ASAP. I believe that nowadays they have stopped completely teaching this verb. But if they haven't, folks, and you need this reminder again, do not ever, ever, ever use the verb ligmor, ligmor, to mean to finish or complete, and only use the verb lisayem. Only. If you do not, you will be saying something very graphic that you probably didn't intend to say. And we're going to leave it at that. If you have questions about that, we'll get into it. We're running out of time, so I want to get through as much as I can because we have more. We did words that have fallen out of place. Now we're going to do common mistakes from translations. Even in Hebrew, you're going to see la sotalia. It is incorrect, and I will I will take shots and arrows for this one, but we have a verb in Hebrew. It's called la'alot. La'alot means to make aliyah. It also means to ascend. It means a whole bunch of things, but it means to make aliyah. So all you have to say when you're saying I made aliyah is aliti. Or if you want to be even more specific, aliti arza. I made aliyah to the land of Israel. You don't make aliyah anywhere else. Asiti aliyah is taking the English and transposing it onto Hebrew. It's technically incorrect. You will hear people say it. It's aliti. This one also we talk about a lot. In English, we have a lot of verbs and actions that have the helper verb to take or to get photographed, to take a shower, to take a picture, all these different things, right? In Hebrew, we don't have those same helper verbs. We simply have one verb. So for example, if you want to say, I am taking a shower, ani mitkaleach, coming from the verb lehitkaleach. You do not literally translate, I take a shower. That means that you are taking the shower stall in your apartment and you're walking down the street. Just like to take a picture. Do not translate from English to take a picture. That means you are taking a picture with its picture frame and walking down the street. Instead, we use the verb litzalem, as in I am taking the picture, or lehitzalem, as in I'm being photographed. Again, this is something we have to talk about apropos empires and colonization. Just because English is the dominant language of the world and will be for some time, that doesn't mean all languages of the world have to ascribe to English grammar rules and syntax. Definitely not the case. Hence, us learning another language and learning the difference between to take a shower stall down the street versus to take a shower as in to bathe oneself. Lehitkalech, to take a shower as in to bathe oneself. Lakachat miklachat, to walk down the street with a shower, to literally take a shower. Okay. In Hebrew, we have several verbs that gets translated incorrectly as to miss. And this is a great example. And I hear this from Hebrew learners all the time. If you want to say we missed the bus, we got to the bus station just out of time, the verb is lefasfes. Pisfasnu et autobus. That means we missed the bus, as in we missed getting on the bus. If you were to use the verb lehitgagea, that would mean like we longed for the bus. Lehitgagea does not mean to miss. It means to long for someone. Yes, that gets translated as to miss, as in I miss you. Ani mitgagea elecha. That's how you would say that, right? Not as in I miss you. I miss, right? I long for you is what that means. And it doesn't have to be in a romantic way either. If I miss someone, ani mitgagea elecha. I missed the bus, not as in I long for the bus, but I literally missed getting on the bus. אני מפספס את האוטובוס. Okay. This is when you have lots of different options for saying anything other than biglal she, because folks, there is no such expression in Hebrew as biglal she, right? Cause and effect is an important part of any language, but in Hebrew, biglal is its own word and it's followed by a dependent clause. Biglal hageshem, or a very famous song, biglal haruach, because of the wind, right? Biglal means because of. It is never followed by the prefix she and then a clause. It is only followed by a dependent clause, like the rain. For example, Fisfasnu et autobus, we missed the bus, biglal hageshem, because of the rain. That is a great sentence, and that makes total sense to a native Hebrew speaker, right? Because this is about communication, not just about you talking, but also being understood. We missed the bus because of the rain. פספסנו את האוטובוס בגלל הגשם. That's the sentence. If you don't want to say בגלל ש, because I'm telling you not to, you can use כי, you can use מפני ש, כיוון ש. You got all sorts of options here in the say this part. This one I just put in because it's important to always remind you that Hebrew has the article et, which is used always without exception before, excuse me, a direct object. אני רוצה את התפוח. I want the apple. If you have a direct object, it is always preceded by et. You cannot get around that, even if it doesn't exist in English. Sorry, not sorry. You have to use et. Some other words that may not get translated, because again, et does not mean anything, but it is an article that has to be used before a direct object. We have two words. We have actually a bunch of words in Hebrew that mean if, that we use in the conditional. Two words, if, im, and if, lu. What's the difference? Im means if in a general sense. Lu is only used hypothetically, if the conditional thing that we're talking about could never take place. Okay. Continuing in our group of words that don't always get translated correctly is lifgosh and lihipagesh. This is as much not knowing which one to use as certain online translation guides not knowing which one to give you because they don't have enough context or they don't know that there is contextual difference between these two. We've talked about these before. Lifgosh and lihipagesh, they both have the same root. Pe, gimel, shin. They both mean something different. Lifgosh, I'm even going to put, no, I'm not going to put the prepositions there. Lifgosh means to meet in a formal context versus lehipagesh, to meet up, i.e. a more social, informal, casual context. For example, in the United States, there's a famous program on Sunday mornings, Meet the Press. In Israel, on Saturday nights, Channel 12 has the same exact name of a TV show called Pgosh et Haitonaim. Pgosh is the command form of the verb lifgosh, meet the journalists, meet the press, right? Lifgosh means to meet in a formal context, in work, in anything like that, versus lehipagesh, to meet up, meaning it's casual, it's informal, it's social. Two different words that many people will simply translate as to meet. They're used in different contexts, and that is important difference. Usually, and I'm even going to put that here, just explain the difference. Not always, but often the corresponding articles will either be et for lifgosh and im for lihipagesh, to meet up with, lihipagesh im, or lifgosh et, to meet the boss, to meet the parents, right? פגוש את ההורים, פגוש את העיתונאים, meet the press, meet the parents. That's lifgosh et versus to meet up with im. Another one that's really important to get the difference of, and this also makes a huge difference in your Hebrew, lachzor and lahachzir. These both have the exact same root of chet zayin resh, and on the surface, they both mean to return. They do not both mean to return. They are used in totally different contexts, okay? Lif Lachzor means to return, as in ani chozer habaita, I return home, or I'm going home. Versus ani machzir et hasefer lesifriya, I am returning the book to the library. I am not returning to the library, I'm returning the book to the library. If I want to say I'm returning to the library, how would I say it? Ani chozer lesifriya. Okay. I myself, I'm returning to the library. Versus, I am causing something to return to its place. Ani machzir et hasefer lesifriya. I'm returning the book to the library. Okay. The connection between these two verbs, as I wrote here in the note, one is what we call the simple, and one is the causative. This is a little bit more advanced. We're going to talk about binyanim in a couple of weeks from now, but this is an integral part of Hebrew that I know they often don't teach until it's too late, and then they expect you to know. Don't worry, we'll go over it in a little bit, but just know both these verbs often get translated as return, but that's incorrect. One is to return as in yourself, and one is to return something else, to cause something to return. Okay, two more quick ones, and then I want to get to your questions in the Q&A, of course. Common mispronunciations, and I'm going to put this into context, right? Many of these stem from combinations of sounds that we almost never have in English. There are certain sounds, as many words that we have in English, they often fall into similar sound patterns. There are certain sound patterns we just don't have in English. And I'm not just talking about single sounds like ch, we don't have in English. We have certain combinations of sounds that are very rare. For example, we don't have many words in Hebrew, in English. We don't have many words in English that have the sound pna, pna. Most of the time, we separate a lot of these things with extra vowels. And so you will hear, usually it's native English speakers, call the Interior Ministry Misrad HaPanim. That is incorrect. That means Ministry of the Face. Panim is face. Pnim, pna, pna. Pnim is interior, as in etzuv pnim, interior design. Misrad HaPnim is the Interior Ministry, where you get all your documents and your everyday life is documented there. Okay, that's the term. I know that some of you, and there are forms of Hebrew that take the shva vowel, that is those two dots on top of each other, and turn that into a. That's actually where the phonetic English term schwa, that upside down E, comes from. But in Hebrew, modern Hebrew in particular, that is a silent vowel. And when I say silent, it is silent. Misrad hapnim, pna, pna. Practice saying pna, okay? So that you do not get to Misrad hapnim and say, Efo Misrad hapanim, because they're going to look at you like, what did you just say? That makes a huge difference. This one is a classic, and as much as people often make derogatory terms about certain languages in the world that have the R and L sounds, as we say in American English, that are actually much closer on the spectrum to each other, and they make fun of messing them up. This is a common native English speaking mistake, where instead of saying nahag ani rotze laredet or ani rotze laredet, I'm saying it with an American R, nahag ani rotze laredet, nahag I'd like to alight, meaning to get off the bus. They will say nahag ani tzarich laledet or ani rotze laledet, which means nahag I need to or I want to give birth. It is not laledet, it is laredet. RL is a common mix up across cultures around the world. I know we often ascribe that to a certain part of the world. Guess what, folks? This is a common thing that we hear native English speakers say in Israel. Some of them, because the letters are so close to each other, our brain often just does a little switch. It doesn't mean we're dyslexic. It doesn't mean we have anything cognitive going on. It's just our brain trying to deal with all this new data. So, for example, grape juice in Hebrew is mitz anavim. It is not mitz avanim. Avanim with an aleph are stones. Anavim with an ayin is grapes. Mitz anavim. Or another one, just because your brain does that, tapuach adama is a potato. It is not patuach adama, which means open is the earth. And that's actually incorrect also because adama is feminine, but is tapuach adama, literally apple of the earth. Finally, in this category, one that we've talked about before, and this is a great one and a great story, and I'll be happy to tell this story more in depth on Wednesday in our Cafe Oleh conversations, is the verb lehitlonen. We do not have many, if any, words in the modern English language with the sound pla, 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 where there's no vowel in between. That is incredibly important because if you do not pronounce that correctly, you are again saying something very, very off color that you probably don't want to say. So this is a good one to practice because we love to complain in Israel. Lehitlonen, tla, tla, lehitlonen. If you want to know what the XXX stands for, join us on Wednesday. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. And then finally, common misspellings. This is as much don't say that, say this instead, as don't write that, write this instead, because part of using a language is also learning to write and read, whether that's typing on WhatsApp or writing it out or reading in the newspaper. For example, im and im, both pronounced exactly the same in modern Hebrew. Im with an aleph is if, im with an ayin is with. Okay, and then we have el, al, and al. El and el, both spelled exactly the same. And because we don't write the dots and bars that indicate vowel sounds, those go away when you're writing. El can mean a god, any god, versus el, the preposition to or towards. Okay. Context obviously is going to be key here, folks. You'll figure it out really fast, but just know they're both spelled exactly the same way. Aleph Lamed. Aleph Lamed is also used for the word don't. Next week, in next week's class, we're going to talk all about commands, and you're going to learn about how to use the word al, aleph lamed, meaning don't do something. This is how we do a negative command. Don't do this, don't do that, as in the name of this topic today. Al tagid etse is how you would say that, or al tagidu etse. I'm saying to a plural, a number of people. Al means don't, but it's also spelled aleph lamed. And then there's al, ayin lamed, pronounced exactly the same way, which is a preposition meaning on or about. This is all to say Hebrew is a very concise language. There are rules, there is context, just like with everything else, but we need to be mindful about what are our own blinders, biases, all the different things we come into when learning this language, whether it's a spelling issue or it's a pronunciation issue, it's just a sound we're not used to having, or a translation issue. We're translating either directly from our native language or using a service that doesn't quite get the nuance of things, or it's words that simply fell out of use. They're no longer understood or widely used to be understood by a majority of people. Okay, before I get to questions, first off, we're at 312 participants, so toda raba lekulchem. Thank you all for joining. On Wednesday, we're going to take all of these examples you have and you're going to use them in conversations. I'm going to give you conversations. You'll get that at least 24 hours before Wednesday's class at 8 p.m. Israel time. And you're going to be forced to use these say this instead expressions to start getting us used to using them and sounding more local. Okay. That's Wednesday's class. Next week's class, like I said, continues our finding our voice, and we're going to be talking about commands and your commanding voice. All the different ways we have in Hebrew to say a command. The fancy term in English is the imperative, but it's not just one tense. We actually have multiple ways in Hebrew to say something followed by an exclamation point. Basically, next week is all exclamation points. How do we talk in exclamation points? All right. With that, let me get to some Q&A. Questions. Would you say Shalom Rav if it's only women present, or is there a feminine version? You can say Shalom Rav. Rav means a lot of people. Multi. Multi Shalom to everyone, right? Multiple Shalom to everyone. It is not referring to a Rav as in a rabbi. It is simply many to many people. Shalom Rav. Right? Is it possible to say mutarli instead of efshar? Please do not say mutarli. It absolutely is Hebrew. Mutarli means is it permitted to me? But again, we talked about words that exist versus words that are just not used on a regular basis. Use efshar. Mutarli is super duper old-fashioned Hebrew and very high level Hebrew. Don't use it. It's not that you won't be understood. It just sounds out of context from everyday conversation. If that's the place you're at, mutarli is very, again, it's just very old-fashioned and formal. Efshal is your best friend. Tuchli la'azor li. Do not say tuchli la'azor li. Would you be able to help me? Efshar la'azor li, as a question, looking at the person, makes it completely understood. Can you help me? Do not use this verb yachol like you do in English. My tutor said to use ulai instead of efshar. Ulai means maybe. Maybe versus possible, just like in English, ulai is maybe, efshar is possible. What's the difference? Context. Okay. Just going through questions that specifically have to do with where we go first, and if we have time, other ones. Is it okay to say tuchal letzalem otanu, or is it better to say efshar letzalem otanu? Again, folks, if you have the option between the two, always say efshar. Efshar letzalem otanu, could you take our picture? Beautiful, polite, especially to a random person. That's how you're going to say it. Tuchal letzalem otanu is the equivalent in English of someone saying, can you take a picture of us? And that annoying relative saying, I don't know, can I? Drop that conversation and just say, efshar letzalem otanu. Someone says something outrageously or facetiously. Do you say birtzinut? Something like, come on. You can say nu bemet, like I explained. Nu bemet, no, come on. No, seriously would be the equivalent of it. And you could say birtzinut is like seriously. It's more like, are you being for real? But nu bemet is a great way to reply to someone in a sarcastic way as well. When do you say ani bemet rotze and when is it ani mamash rotze? You're not really going to say ani bemet rotze. Ani bemet rotze, I truly want versus I really want. Ani mamash rotze. First off, do you need that amplifier? Can you just say ani rotze and it means the same thing? That's the first question, not which one to use. Are you saying the exact same thing by taking out a whole word? Ani rotze. Is that enough? If you need to add something to really amplify it, then use mamash or me'ot, which means very. Right? But if you don't have to use either, ani rotze is great. If bemet is shorter, why is it not preferred? It's because the meaning is not the same. Bemet means truly. versus ברצינות, seriously. And oftentimes when we're saying באמת, we really mean seriously, right? When someone says something and you want to reply, is that true? You're really saying seriously, just like you would in English. You're not saying truly. If you're saying, is that true? זה באמת. You can say that, but honestly, you're going to hear ברצינות more often. And remember, it's not just about what you want to say, it's also about what you're hearing. Is it okay to say סליחה or אני מתנצל better for I am sorry? אני מתנצל means I apologize. אני מצטער, I'm sorry. סליחה, again, means forgiveness, excuse me, pardon, all those things. This is also to say, if you are that person, and shout out to my relatives who may be on this call, who say sorry every other word, use slicha. Honestly, we don't do that in Israeli society and in the Hebrew language, but if you are that person, you can say mitzta'er or mitzta'eret or mitnatzel, mitnatzelet. It gets to be too much, just like honestly it does in English. I've heard klomar and ki'ilu used interchangeably. Klomar is another great one. That is to say, klomar is a little bit older, but you can say klomar instead of zotomeret. Zotomeret is just more commonly heard. What about just ke or ki for like, such as such? No, the expression is ki'ilu. That is an adaptation of like from California English into modern Hebrew. Ze inyan she, it is a matter, ze inyan shel means it's a matter of. Inyan means interest or matter. Shel of. It's a matter of. Ze inyan shel. It's a matter of, and then fill in the blank. Is zotomeret feminine? Yes. That doesn't mean you're feminine, but the expression is zotomeret. That is to say. It is just a feminine thing. That doesn't mean any of the words around it have to be conjugated accordingly. It's an expression. Okay. How do I say aliyah future tense? I will be making aliyah in December, for example. So first off, our great resource, pe'alim.com, online verb conjugator, will do that for you. You can also say, ani mitkaven la'alot, I intend to make aliyah. Ani mitachnen la'alot, I am planning to make aliyah. We have lots of other helper verbs that we can add before that. Instead of just literally saying ani aleh, I will make aliyah. Can you help me? Again, אפשר לעזור לי. We will cover this on Wednesday's class. So if you're asking me this question again, please join us on Wednesday. What is the more common natural way to say seriously? ברצינות. You can also say אתה רציני, but you will hear ברצינות much more often because ברצינות does not mean that you do not have to conjugate anything. It means seriously. If you want to say, are you serious? The adjective serious in Hebrew is retzini. Ata retzini or at retzinit, or everything is covered gender and plurality wise, birtzinut, seriously. How do you say for the sake of lema'an? Right. Lifgosh versus lihipagesh is not about planned meetings. You can meet up with someone for coffee and plan that ahead of time. It's about what is the nature of the meetup. Is it formal or is it casual? If it's formal, as in a job, as in parents, as in in-laws, as in anything formal, it's going to be lifgosh. You could, הבוקר פגשתי את המנהל שלי במסדרון. This morning, I met my boss in the hallway. Versus, אתה רוצה שניפגש בעוד כשבוע? Do you want to meet up in another week? Okay. You can plan in advance. You can do it right on the spot. It's about formality versus informality, not planning in advance. Why does blank miss the bus start with a F sound instead of a P sound? Great question. That has to do with the fact that the verb is lifasfes. Um, and yes, according to Hebrew, it should be pispasti, but first off, that's really hard to say. And it has to do with all sorts of other complicated rules with regards to a dagesh in the middle of a letter that changes its sound, pisfasti. Someone is asking a question about the verb ligmor. We've talked about this before, folks. I've told you this before. The word for finale and the way to say to someone before Yom Kippurim, you can use the word gmal, as in, for example, the finale of a contest is called a gmal. And gmal chatima tova is the traditional way to say Yom Kippurim. We've covered this before, so that's why I didn't cover it now. Those are the only two of maybe another handful of exceptions to the rule. Never ever use the verb ligmol. Just get that in your heads. Drop the verb entirely from your vocabulary altogether. Instead of shalom rav, can you say shalom lekulam? It is very formal, but yes, you can say shalom lekulam. Hello, everyone. Shalom rav is the more um, typical way to be polite to a large amount of people to say shalom. Okay, with that, unfortunately, we are out of time. If you wrote in the chat, we'll be looking over that in the next day or so. In the meantime, this recording and the spreadsheet will go up on YouTube in the next day or so, and you'll get a reminder about that. Please join us on Wednesday, where we'll be practicing using all these terms. And in the meantime, whether I see you Wednesday or next week's class, toda rabah, thank you all for joining, and lihitraot. See you soon.